Good morning and welcome to Broadcast to Post. I'm Jeff Sangpil, Chief Technologist here at Keycode Media. We ran out of time in our last live stream when we were discussing building a TV studio in 2021. So we thought we could do a follow-up episode dialing in on just the production control room. If you missed that first episode, we're going to include the link in the description and chat. We will be joined shortly by some of the greatest broadcast engineering minds on the Keycode Media team, discussing how we have successfully deployed over 700 audio, visual, broadcast, and production upgrade projects each year. We're going to be discussing trends, standards, and the things teams need to think about when building out a production control room. Before we get to that, quick commercial break.
This is the story of the greatest audiovisual integrator and reseller, Keycode Media. They're a pretty amazing group of people. The Keycode Media team can tell you everything that you need to know about thousands of broadcast vendors and how it connects to your production infrastructure, instantly bringing 100 years of technical experience to your business.
With Avid Nexus, you've got a number of connectivity choices you can have.
Like our engineer Jeff Sangpil. Jeff's team will walk clients through design and installations every single day. We'll help you find the right thing, even if it's not the most expensive.
If you're looking for a more compact solution, we could check out the Carbonite Ultra to better fit your needs.
There's also RVK, the master of storage, or Grace Nahera, the logistics extraordinaire.
We are showing the equipment's on time, and the tech will be there first thing in the morning.
Oh wait, we almost forgot Zuri. She's from our finance team. Now you've seen five of our 80 employees collaborating with customers like yourself, helping businesses across the United States from our multiple office locations. Customers like to do business with Keycode Media because when you purchase it, you know it's going to be set up, you know it's going to work, and you know that if anything goes wrong, we have your back. So the next time you're buying a widget you're not sure about, installing digital signage or conference room, integrating a fly pack, upgrading a machine room, or building a stadium, classroom, or studio, call us and we'll pick up and make sure it works every time.
All right, enough with this stuff from the marketing team, commercials. Let's get to the tech. Let's briefly revisit the core elements that make up a control room. Essential components in the control room. What are they? And what choices do you have? Video switchers. This is one of the first considerations in setting up a control space. It's where the technical director sits and runs the console. Some switchers are narrowly focused, yet extremely reliable for productions that can't have any failure. Read live on air. Other switchers take an all-in-one approach, providing you with a full suite of flexible software tools. How do you decide here? Graphics, from simple lower thirds to modern things like video wall control or tombstones that grow up out of the ground in your virtual set. The look and feel of your show is determined in your graphics. We're a long way from my first days where fonts were on chips that you needed to put into the CG before you could use them. Audio, without it, what you really have is just a surveillance system. What is cutting edge for studio and sound mixing, and how do things like live surround sound change the choices you may need to make here? Comm systems, who in production can hear whom? The nerve center of making any production happen is in its communication system while you're in production. Replay systems, for sports that need play out of that last clip, maybe even in slow motion, which goes hand in hand with ingest and play out. Production often has pre-produced segments. How are those fed into the setup? And some productions aren't live. They ingest multiple cameras and record them, as well as a line feed for later post-production prior to delivery. I've worked on soaps that have used ingest for post in a production environment. Edit while capture, anyone? Encoders and decoders. Decoders help receive remote video signals from outside of your TV studios, like satellite trucks and live view cellular fly packs. The encoders send picture back to them. Control room video walls, a variety of reference monitors hung on custom brackets, which help your control room team visually manage all the video and audio components in a broadcast. All right, we're getting into our panel discussion now. I'm going to ask a variety of questions, but first, who's here? John Furter, is the VP for Broadcast Engineering for Keycode Media. John has over 35 years of experience in the broadcast industry, most notably as Director of Studio and Post-Production Engineering for the CBS television network in New York. John was responsible for the design, construction, and support of all production and post-production facilities in the CBS Broadcast Center, including the renovations for The Late Show with David Letterman, NFL Today, 60 Minutes, 48 Hours, CBS Evening News, as well as the new studio for CBS This Morning. John is a SMPTE Fellow and chairs the David Sarnoff Medal Award Committee. Mason Pierce. Mason has over 10 years of experience working in all aspects of media and broadcast production. He started his career at Tribune Media Group, managing 4K post and editorial environments and 3 HD production studios. Mason successfully managed the integration of a multi-million-dollar new construction contracts with extremely complex workflows, along with tight deadlines. Mario Heeb. Mario is a Society of Broadcast Engineers certified professional broadcast engineer with over 30 years of broadcast experience in radio, television, and live events, including ESPN, NBC, CBS, Fox, along with many others. He's previously done work broadcasting audio, video, and RF with the Utah Jazz, the Denver Nuggets, as well as the Olympic Games in Sydney, Salt Lake City, Athens, and Vancouver. He's also a contributing writer for Radio World and TV Technology. So now that we know who everyone is, after my initial questions, we'll be answering all of the audience questions. Please submit your questions at any time in the YouTube, Facebook, or the Vimeo embedded landing page chat. All right, let's get to this.
Audio problems.
All right, just realized we had some audio problems there. We are live with my alternate microphone. Everybody should be able to hear me now. Folks, you go ahead and unmute. Let's start the centralized section with probably video switchers. So what we'll do is we will have, we'll kind of gear each question toward one person, and then anybody else can kick in afterwards. So the central focus of any control room usually is the video switcher. So John, let's start with you. What are some of the key questions you ask to determine the best switcher for a build or an upgrade?
Well, there's application. What exactly are the programs you feel you want to produce? And then, of course, budget is always a consideration. There are so many options now with production switchers, especially with the addition of NDI as a video format and also ST2110. So, you know, that runs the gamut of applications. We're finding, for instance, in a lot of council chamber setups, educational setups, house of worship setups, that a switcher like a NewTek TriCaster is very applicable because the NDI gives you not only the video transport, but also allows you to control pan, tilt, and zoom cameras. For more, let's say, higher level, higher budget applications, universities, sports applications, news applications. Many of those are geared more towards what we'll call the traditional SPI type switcher, just for the regular normal workflow. Although we have seen in some of our projects for daytime talk shows that TriCasters were used there as well. So we're seeing a lot more widespread application. The other exciting thing I think about production switchers now is that Ross Video has combined their Ultrix router with the Carbonite switchers and the Acuity switchers, so that essentially the routing switcher is all of your production switcher inputs that you can choose to produce with. And this gives you a lot of flexibility, especially if you're in a hybrid facility where you're still part SPI, but also moving towards 2110, that you can mix these sources within the same switcher. So again, my larger questions are, what is your application? How often are you going to use this particular equipment? How many people do you have to produce your shows? Which of course also leads to the other questions that I'm sure we'll get to later. But basically, it's really a matter of sitting down and sussing out with the customer exactly what the applications and the needs are.
Awesome. Mason, Mario, any thoughts on switchers there?
Yeah, I think the switcher technologies are changing, or at least not necessarily fully changing, but there's new technologies coming into play that are really pushing what traditionally a video switcher position or a TD position and really the piece of equipment itself can actually do. So collapsing positions into a single position where a TD is actually running graphics, playback, and other components of the show. So man count and body power is definitely, or manpower is definitely a big piece of that conversation. But I really mentioned the fact that switcher technology is changing because we're seeing, like, as we see Ross start to integrate their switchers into their routing frames, still FPGA based. Most switchers are going to be that FPGA based in the traditional side of things, but we're seeing more and more solutions come to light, kind of mimicking what NewTek had been doing for a long time, which was software based. So now you're taking these signals in and using a software engine to mix everything. Panasonic started doing the same with Kairos. So now you're not actually looking at a traditional FPGA based baseband in, baseband out. You're looking at a server that has an IO card, and that server is actually a software defined piece, not necessarily dedicated hardware for that processing, whether it be a DVE effect, chroma, keys, matting, whatever. So I think that's another interesting thing to keep your eye on. I feel like I say this every single time, as broadcast, corporate, education, as all of these technologies our world, media and entertainment, starts bridging the gap towards typical IT infrastructure type systems, servers, networking, and that's kind of what things are running on.
Very cool. So one of the other things that pops up as these things kind of amalgamate and democratize, automation systems in your production environment. So Mason, in 2021, how has automation changed the people and the roles inside of a control room? Do you think it's different for news versus a school or a live venue or any other application? Do you think collaboration has really changed as we moved into this?
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, as the buzzword of our current last couple years is with COVID and the fact that we've had to bring manpower down in locations, give more space, and even move positions that were typically all in one environment out to external environments, whether that be your living room or ancillary spaces within that production facility. I definitely would say things have been changing over the last couple years. I think everyone's kind of reacting to what do we have to do to actually throw this show and how do we accomplish it in a safe way. Automation has often actually, what I've found recently, found its way into upgrades on sites that never really thought they would need or want automation because they're needing to lower the body count within the control rooms and actually operate a production or a show with fewer bodies, and automation can really help bridge that gap. I definitely, I like to look at this when it comes to automation positions, whether it's remote, whether it's on premise, or whatever it might be, is ultimately, what are your facility requirements? What do you have to work with? What are your expectations from your, enterprise, whether that's corporate or broadcast or whatever it might be? So that way, as we approach control room builds that are either net new or being upgraded, we can build in those automation pieces where it makes sense. We can build in those remote pieces where it makes sense. And I definitely see automation playing a bigger game as we, further this kind of technology increase. Often people were nervous of automation or the additional work and pre-prep it takes to make automation run successfully. And people are delving into it and finding it's much more palatable than they had initially thought on the onset. So we're seeing automation in more places than we've ever seen. We're also seeing a lot of remote operator being introduced in the modern times that we are living in.
Very cool. John, any thoughts on news automation?
Well, yeah, I think that's where we've really seen the biggest impact of automation overall. I mean, 10 years ago, there were a dozen people in a control room doing a local news show. Now you walk in and there might be 3. Because automation systems such as Ross Overdrive or Sony ELC work with ENPS or with Avid iNews, so that you can, by using the script, your news script, you're automating all of the takes, all of the effects on your switcher, you're automating camera moves, you're automating your graphics, you're automating your audio, turning people's mics on and off if they're on or off the air, and that's had a major impact. I was prior to joining Keycode Media, I was working with a religious broadcaster, and they were using a script system with Overdrive to do their nightly news show. Again, 3 or 4 people in the control room. They had the extra person in because they were operating the prompter, and they weren't counting on the talent to use a foot pedal to run their own prompter. But again, the reduction in staff there, and it's very, very efficient. And once, as Mason said, once it's properly configured, which is for a fair amount of people, easy enough to do on their own, or you work with the manufacturer. Once that's all set up, it pretty much runs on its own without much adjustment. So I think news really has had the biggest bonus from automation.
Very cool. Well, you mentioned graphics there, so let's get into that side of it. So Mario, in graphics, what are some of the cool new technologies that are being implemented today? What do we need to consider if we want a functional virtual set, systems and the people that we build for? And how have displays inside of arenas changed the way you set up graphic systems for sports venues?
A project that we're currently working on, we designed a very low budget green screen stage and LED lighting, to make way for a virtual set with no thoughts of a conventional set. For larger budgets, vendors like Ross, they can provide a turnkey virtual production facilities where the cameras and the graphics machines are well integrated. Speaking of Ross, last week we installed a Ross Expression at the University of Wyoming Athletics Control Room. And now this expression was NDI compatible, and we chose this expression because as a main switcher and control surface, they're using the NewTek TriCaster, which is has a proprietary NDI format that's used for networking and delivering the signals. It took about 15 minutes to put this expression in the rack, and it took about another 10 minutes to commission it. And then about 5 minutes later, we were keying a team logo over the video through the TriCaster. So very user-friendly. As far as sports projects, I've worked on quite a few sports video productions over the years. And a few years ago, I worked on a project at the Utah Jazz where they took 12 ROS expression units that were installed to drive what we called a halo, which was a very large circular shaped video display that covered the interior of the arena at mid-height. Now, if you've ever been to Disneyland and have seen the circle vision there, this display was much, much larger than that display. It was all run by the ROS expressions, feeding spider units, and really creates a very stunning visual effect within the arena.
Very cool. I mean, that's also why I know exactly when I go to Dodger Stadium who is sponsoring that inning. You know, what particular venue. Any other thoughts on graphics from John or Mason?
Well, I think the other thing too that's impressed me over the last number of years is if you go to a sports stadium like Yankee Stadium or Citi Field, there's a broadcast control room, and then there's a graphics control room that has a lot of the similar equipment for all different purposes. So it's totally a completely separate production, and just the length to which people like major league teams, universities are going to provide really high quality graphics is an exciting development and a great challenge for us as systems integrators to provide to our clients.
I think I'm jumping in, Jeff, sorry, but we're going one more with graphics here. So I think one interesting thing in graphics that I've seen as I've come along is, you know, entry into graphics and CG isn't what it used to be. And you can, I mean, from the advent of like New Blue Titler for Avid folks and new tech folks that have leveraged that type of tool, very low cost, very simple to get some basic CG elements on there. And we have systems that go, you know, like the ROS side that can drive large boards, click effects, which can drive large scoreboards and mixed formats, not mixed formats, sorry, but mixed frame sizes that aren't a traditional video frame size are often driven by these systems. So that's one thing to kind of keep in your head, that if I have this unique, whether it's a Spadia or an LED or some custom shaped canvas, if you will, and you want to do something unique and interesting with it that you can adjust and trigger, and it's not just a digital signage type element, graphic systems are actually very useful in those types of applications and don't need to necessarily break the bank, obviously, depending on your canvas and complexity. The other piece that I've found interesting in graphics is the ability to, over time, we've seen links into data sources. So like the first thing that comes into mind is like ROS's data link. The ability for graphic systems to query RSS feeds, to query existing Google Docs. So maybe you have a grid that shows all of your talent, and that way all of those graphics are actually pre-built and looking at some third-party data source to drive the creation of those graphics on the fly. Systems have been using that for some time, but that's definitely something that's happening in the graphics world, and sometimes a very useful licensable feature that's often overlooked and can create tons of simplifications and efficiencies within your graphics workflow.
And one of the places we see those advances is every 4 years when we throw a presidential election. That's where the technology really, the next leap forward, we start to see it. Mason, getting into replay, ingest, play out, what flexibility do you think these systems need to have as the infrastructure evolves? You know, if you're dealing with sports, you know, variable speed, instant replay, or just clear clip playback, or, you know, what questions are you asking to discover what the best systems are to fit for a facility, venue, or production, capacity and access, that sort of stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, I like to start that one with really defining the need. Oftentimes, somebody comes to us and it's like, oh, I need this, all this replay and all of these elements. And then it really boils down to all they're really looking to do is ingest and be able to play back at a later date on a later production. So identifying the proper systems, because when you start looking at replay, especially into HFR, so high frame rates, so sports applications, absolutely, some of those systems, dollars start going up based off the capabilities. So understanding from a core concept of what is your real need for replay. Is it on-demand instantaneous replay? Are you going to have somebody logging? What types of clips and media are we working with, or sorry, content are we working with? I've found that there's a lot of efficiencies that can also be created in the replay side of the world. So if you are, hey, I need to solve my ingest problem, I need to solve a logging problem, and then I also need to have some component of replay. Instead of doing those in disparate systems, you can gain efficiencies from actually bringing that all under one hood. A lot of manufacturers that are, kind of your replay powerhouses, such as EVS, Evertz, Ross has Mira, all those, they're starting to integrate abilities for user interfaces for like a corporate user, who you look at it and you're like, well, why would a corporate user ever want replay? But oftentimes some of these small EP event spaces, event production type spaces, they have a talent monitor, the talent's doing some pre-capture, and he wants to see what his last take just looked like. And replay systems can be a great way to leverage, I'm going to just bounce this back to the talent monitor, and he can go ahead and take a look at what he just did, and then out we go. So there's more usage for replay than just the traditional mindset of, here's this great play that I just saw in this soccer game, football game, basketball game, and I want to replay that for some highlight reel or whatever I'm doing, or just that instantaneous replay that fans have come to love. There's applications beyond it. You can also leverage those systems for ingest only. You can leverage those systems for logging and other elements of that nature. So looking at defining what your needs are, what frame rates do I need? Do I need to be able to zoom or crop or do any sorts of other effects to this replay content? Or am I just looking at more simple ingest only playback when needed, but not on the instantaneous type of timeline? So I think replay is one of those pieces that's commonly, no, we don't need that. But there might be elements of a replay system that will actually do you great service in your productions.
Yeah, and I've been in the situation where, they go to do the live in front of audience pre-tape, and they discover that the actual rehearsal the night before was a lot better. And someone asks the EVS operator, looks and says, oh yeah, I got that, all 8 cameras, it's just in the system, we'll pull that and we'll use that instead of the this pre-tape that we're trying to do. John, any other thoughts on these types of systems?
Yeah, I think the other questions I ask are, building on Mason's, use cases. Are the clips that you're ingesting one use only and then going to be dumped? Are you going to maintain them for a while? So we can try to calculate best storage space, storage size, and then also what type of drives you're going to store on. In some cases, real heavy duty replay, you're probably looking at a large cache of solid state drives as opposed to something a lot smaller where hard disk drives are still adequate. And then also in some cases, if it's real simple logo and basic clip playback, a number of production switchers have a fair amount of storage in them now that you could store those clips, and then just recall them with a macro or push button. And
in some cases, there's a need to take that captured ingest material and kick it to archive because they want to keep everything, exactly. Monetize that content later. So getting into audio and communications. Mario, as live productions evolved over the last year, which has been quite an evolution, it showed this necessity to expand comm outside the bubble of just the control room. For a lot of people outside of the traditional sports folks who always have been doing that. Has that experience changed the way you think about comms for production control rooms today?
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned sports, and we've had fairly large intercom systems for sports for many years. If you're doing golf or auto racing, you might have to talk to somebody a mile or two away, and then there's always been a dial-up circuit back to the network to talk to their intercom. I think yeah, we're going to see a lot more changes, especially integrated with Zoom calls like what we're doing right now. It would be kind of nice. I can hear program audio on my little speaker here in my little studio, but it might be nice to hear our producer do some talkback, you know, telling us speed up, slow down, shut up. I don't know, whatever the case. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure companies like ClearComm and RTS are probably working on the very problem right now. We have audio, we have video. Now let's get the other pieces of it. Let's get the intercom and the IFBs and that sort of thing.
And then transition from comms, moving, I mean, you see all of these manufacturers, ClearComm, RTS, Riedel, enter your favorite comm system, moving towards AES-67 for these exact reasons Mario's pointing out. It's that, hey, we're now spanning, multi-location, multi-site, distances greater than even a couple miles. We're all used to the comms of, oh, bring in two waves, bring in telephony, bring in all these different communications aspects. And really the comms world has been, doing that for a very long time. That's definitely something that's been integrated as part of comms. But now the ability to streamline that over a network-based protocol, especially as all of our telephony systems have gone VoIP, as far as collaborators like Zoom and Skype and Teams and whatever the other tools might be, using those types of network distributed audio will really help solve a lot of those problems of how am I bringing these desperate pieces together and making them play happy in this ecosystem. It's also opening up the ability to get beyond just, okay, IFB was this mix minus and that's that, and getting more into this is a little more complicated. Now we're seeing comm systems can drive and bring in, full MADI lines from existing audio mix, and you're actually getting full program, mixed minuses, other elements in an ISO form. So you can actually start moving those around in your comm system appropriately. Again, all courtesy of the nature of AES-67 based audio, network distributed audio. So I think that's a very exciting piece. Obviously, I always like to harp on comm systems for integration into more user-friendly type interfaces. So we have a lot of guys asking for Bluetooth and things like that. I haven't seen that from a lot of folks. Riedel's really been the only one that I've been impressed with on some of that aspect. But I think more and more we're going to see those comms devices like ClearComm has an app on your phone. So you can actually use your phone as your comms device. So using more standard technology, if you will, that's not specific to a production or specific to a system where, I can Bluetooth my existing headset into this and now I can communicate with my team. That's another exciting thing I like to push on those comms folks, and let's keep moving that ball down up the hill, if you will, because that's something that just makes everyone's lives easier and more usable, especially now that no one wants to share headsets, no one wants to share in-ears, no one wants to share these types of devices as much so as we had seen in the past.
That also speaks to how has audio itself evolved in production environments over the last couple of years. Anybody have thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are some new tools like the Ross Ultrix router, which we talked about a little bit earlier, which is really a very small form factor router. I first looked at it and I said, where's the audio? where are the audio connections for this router? Doing a little bit of research into it, I found out that it's done through an SFP port, and then it's all done in MADI. Which, it's a different way to do audio workflows, but we just put one in a facility and it seems to work just fine. And there are definitely advantages to that. If you're building a TV truck and every inch of the TV truck is valuable, your router doesn't have to be as big. Your audio part of the system doesn't have to be that big. You can use that extra space for other things in the plant.
Yeah, I think it's as we're seeing audio moving towards distributed network or just being distributed through a network versus your traditional analog or digital audio systems. there's still a lot coming together with Dante being on AES-67, but using kind of their own proprietary interconnection. You've got AES-67 in the mix. You've got other manufacturers that are also doing some of their own proprietary, so like WheatNet and things of that nature. Seeing all of those start to come together for interoperability, right? And that's a piece that we're now seeing. You know, if you want to kind of look at what's happening with video and where we're headed, you can really look at what some of the audio aspect has happened, because they kind of were a little bit early onto that bandwagon. You see a lot of flavors right now. They can work together. It takes a little bit more finesse or tweaking, tuning, if you will, to get it all to play nice. But working towards that interoperability, and then it's simultaneously that interoperability of that network-based audio to network-based video. And so now we're starting to create, as Mario brings up, hey, now we have these systems that are handling our video, handling our audio, and allowing us to mix those in really any way we see fit. Gives a lot of flexibility and power to the user. Sure, some complexity. Now your routers are, you know, not just this control panel that you're using. Okay, I'm going to use Dante to route some of this. Okay, I'm going to use this to redirect some of these streams. So getting a handle on keeping track of all those pieces is a little bit different, and sometimes it definitely takes a departure from your traditional audio workflows. But the benefits that are gained are certainly there and certainly viable and worthwhile as you make those updates and efforts. That all being said, and this is a joke I told to Mario when we were doing our thing, a lot of times, you know, it depends on what that audio source is. We're not saying that networked audio is the end all be all. You still need to have solid preamps. You still need to have solid audio processing. We're not talking about replacing advanced DSPs. We're not talking about replacing mixed positions and things of that nature. Now, does it simplify our ability to get that signal in and out of those DSPs, mixed positions, so on and so forth? Absolutely. But always bear in mind when working on audio that you want to be sure that you know, what is my audio source? Is it going to an appropriate type tool before I get it in my distributed network so for others to use?
Cool. And while we're in this topic, we had a question come in from Mike Krim. Viewpoints on the top 4 providers that manage live comms in a mixed production environment, which includes new on-prem control room and team members who are working from home, comms including intercom, mix minus, and interrupt. So somebody's actually asking for what vendors fit here.
I mean, honestly, all the vendors really have a solution, to be honest. ClearComm has gateways into public internet, RTS as well, and the Atom line, obviously Riedel as well. They all have a play there. Some degree, you know, I always look at comms. First off is, you know, is there an existing installation in your facility? Because bridging desperate manufacturers of comm systems can get sticky, and it's not really a position you want to put much of anybody into. Now, if it's a net new build greenfield, it's all about looking at the features and the ease of how it is to integrate those pieces that you might be looking at. You know, with, for example, a ClearComm system. Okay, I need to get this gateway to get this out, to get this onto public, to get this over here. And on this other system, I can actually do that natively via its onboard NIC that's actually feeding all my panels, and everything else can feed a far edge WAN position. So looking at those, like having kind of your goals and your needs in your mind as you start to vet those technologies, absolutely highly recommended. And it will help whittle down which of those is, you know, the best fit for your particular applications. But to be honest, I in my opinion, think that pretty much along the lines of, you know, those big group of comms folks, they all are keeping pretty well in lockstep with features and functionality as they evolve.
Very cool. So let's get back to the spectacle in the control room, which is the video wall in front of everybody. John or Mason, what are some of the best setups? Individual, you want to go with individual monitors or larger multi-views? And how does your selection of a routing switcher play into how you're making those decisions regarding multi-view?
Well, in most cases, we're seeing multiple displays, usually in the neighborhood of 46 to 55 inches that are tiled out from multi-viewers. In some cases, for critical signals, for instance, at the camera shader, and then at the TD and director station for preview and program, people still use individual dedicated OLED monitors for critical evaluation. But even that's melding into the multi-viewers. The choice of I think of the amount of monitors and how it affects how you're setting up your multi-view is how many people in how many different areas need to see certain signals. In many cases, the production switcher itself can accommodate the number of multi-viewers that you have. But in a facility where you're bringing in a lot of outside feeds that you would route through a routing switcher, perhaps even as soft inputs instead of hard inputs to the production switcher, then it makes more sense to run your multi-viewer out of your routing switcher, because then that way you can in better detail set up different tiles for the different viewers. You can dedicate particular feeds. You can have individuals in the control room change feeds to individual tiles on the fly. That in and of itself gives you more flexibility. So I always think it works better if you have a routing switcher in your control room to use the routing switcher as your multi-viewer. Again, because you have that multiplicity of inputs that you can monitor.
Yeah, and I'm going back to, I don't know what I did with my audio. Let's see if that fixed. All right, going back to like the wall itself, you know, I agree. I see more independent, like consumer, even prosumer display types going in. For example, LG, you can buy consumer LG OLEDs that you can actually calibrate. Low cost panel, easy to replace. Sure, you're going to have the bezels and you're going to have that breakup in your wall. So that's the type of things that I'm seeing a lot of just for the cost nature of it all. Now, in a flagship control room, still seeing a lot of LED. Pixel pitch matters. You need to look at your viewing positions, viewing angles. What are we working with in this area? But certainly, I don't see that that's totally disappeared from the market, but there are certainly more cost-effective routes to approach that. And we've seen consumer, prosumer display actually take a pretty big share of that monitor wall scenario. Being able to service panels independently versus have an LED wall that now, okay, this chunk of it's not working, but I have to get an LED wall tech to come in and now he's working on this whole wall, versus, oh, this panel's dead, we're in a production, that panel's dead, we're shifting some multi-views around and we can keep moving. And then when we get this serviced, we can actually service it in a modular fashion. Obviously, a lot of the LED walls are modular, but you don't have to have that, expert technician or LED technician that's a highly skilled set, right? I would say I echo John's sentiments on the multi-view and having the ease of flexibility. Big thing for me, like he kind of mentioned, is positions. Where are these positions? What is their relationship to the multi-view or to the monitor wall? What's our multi-view counts? Are we leveraging dedicated multi-viewers? Are we leveraging switcher-based multi-viewers? Even to some degree, as John mentioned, using a routing switcher to handle some of the multi-view, using your facility routing switcher to actually output duplicates of inputs into multi-view systems is another thing that manufacturers have been doing an awful lot of. It comes to mind Evertz X-Link. Ultrix does it natively inside of their router on specific outputs that you select to drive specific multi-view heads. Having that multi-viewer, if you will, embedded or being driven off of a routing switcher crosspoint or the routing switcher itself gives you huge advantages to not eating up outputs of your router to feed external multi-views to then have to dedicate those. The routing becomes a little easier for you. and leveraging those types of systems whenever possible. You're already, probably have a facility router, or you're probably investing in a facility router. Looking at those pieces of technology and leveraging the additional capabilities without having to purchase external hardware is huge. Also helps for the fact that now you have all of your sources available to you without needing to go make a route out to an external piece and then now adjust my multi-viewer to my liking. So definitely cool steps in the cool progression in the technology in our capabilities of being able to monitor and control those productions.
Very cool. So let's get into a few more audience questions. First one I'm going to handle because it actually has to do with what we're doing here in Burbank. Martin Lorenzo is asking, in this seminar, what platform are you using to communicate? Zoom or Google Meets? The four of us are in a Zoom room. That is how we can hear each other, and our mix minus audio is handled correctly. What you can't see are the two hidden people, one of which is our TriCaster 2. So our TriCaster 2 is what's creating the four-way split. So you see, Mason down there, John over there, and Mario over there. Am I pointing the right way? No, he's over there. Backwards. So the actual picture with the background, that's coming off the TriCaster 2, but our primary communications and messaging is happening through Zoom, as it just makes it a heck of a lot easier than setting up RTS feeds going all over the place. We could do it, but throwing up a Zoom call is a lot quicker sometimes than digging into the higher tech ways of knocking something out. So the folks at Mountain View Baptist Church are asking, what are the best options for integrating frame sizes? 4K, 1080p, 720p, but all getting down into a 1080p output.
That's a tough challenge. Definitely, production switchers, obviously, in many cases will have frame syncs. Now, you're not going to be able to handle a lot of those, large frame size differences because a routing switcher will be in a mode. So you're running in HD mode, you're running in UHD mode. We've come across this in a number of places, like as an example, sports venues where their camera systems are all going to be UHD, high frame rate. But at the end of the day, for their house mix that's hitting all of the suites and all of the screens around the stadium, it's just 1080p, or not even 1080p in some cases. It's 720 or 1080i. How do we go about managing that? Oftentimes, terminal gear is just simply required. You're going to have signals. They're wilds, right? That's what I like calling them. Wild signals coming in. It's not my facility's standard, but I need to play with this signal in some way, shape, or form. Products like AJAFSs, the FS, I don't even know which number they're on now. I've just did a bunch of HDRs recently, but they've got FS4, 4-channel boxes, 3s, 2s. Those frame sync devices can also do standards conversion. We'll also do terminal gear to handle some standards conversion to get it into the proper standard, and then rely on a local frame sync, whether that's in the production switcher or even the routing switcher can also do some of that frame syncing. But oftentimes with those wild type cases, you are going to have to have some complement of whether it be up, down, cross. Sometimes it's not even frame sizes that you're struggling with. I'm sure no one wants me to go here, but it's SDR versus HDR, and how am I getting these to play together nicely so my picture doesn't look crazy as I get an HDR up and then I cut to an SDR, or I have two different HDR formats in the same production. Mario probably played a lot of that in the Olympics. I know that's definitely something that was a fun challenge, let's say, that NBC faced and others had faced during that HDR versus SDR, and how do we do HLG, PQ, HDR10, which format, flavor. And it's all, unfortunately, since it's still new, certain manufacturers only do certain flavors. So you do kind of get trapped in some points to have to put in some of that outboard gear to handle some of these wilds.
Very cool. Chuck H has a question about rules of thumb for maintaining lip sync. So one of the core things you want to do is try to get your audio and video in sync as early in the chain as possible. So for our purposes here, I'm actually looking at a camera head that's ahead of me. It is being run through a converter from Bird Dog that turns everything in NDI. However, as we crossed over to the Q&A, my lavalier microphone failed. So now I'm actually talking through my laptop. So I have two different possible sources, and I'm muxing the two together later down the chain. So you may actually be seeing a little bit of lip flap from me because the sources are not embedded at the same point. So I think that's one of the primary things. Try to get things in sync as far up the chain as possible so that you don't have to worry about it lower down. And there are ways to maintain or to adjust for lip flap or lip sync later on in the production infrastructure.
Yeah, definitely make sure you put your delays in, right? So agreed on the signal, marry those signals up to keep those guys in sync as much as possible. Oftentimes that just simply isn't an option. So for example here, I've got my hard hat on. I'm here on a site. I'm here at Austin PBS, so famous for Austin City Limits. Austin City Limits is quite an interesting production because we're doing a rock show on television. A lot of audio sources. That audio gets brought through a desk, processed, and obviously we care about that high fidelity audio because it is a rock show. The audio is really the cool part about it. Obviously the visual is vastly important for broadcast, but we want to have ultimate control of that audio, especially working with bands. They really care how they sound. They have effects racks, they have processing, they have all of this that gets put into the chain, which actually creates delays and little bits of processing. Same thing with video. So tracking your video path and processing on your video path as it relates to tracking your audio path and the delays that are introduced through processing in your audio path. Oftentimes it's, that's where you rely on your friendly systems integrators like Keycode Media who have that knowledge, worked with these devices and know what's the expected delay through these particular processing points. And then timing that and making sure you have the proper delays in your system to be able to accommodate those processing delays, whether that be on video or audio path or potentially both.
Yeah, as far as rule of thumbs go, video is usually going to be behind audio because of the bandwidths involved in the signals. And so usually what you do is you add the delay to the audio to get the lip sync in sync. One of the things that's nice about embedded audio embedded in video is once you embed it and it goes through transmission and all the various transmission delays, it does it together. The audio is always in sync with the video at that point. So look at embedding your video just when you go to transmission. Look at that.
And the terminal gear manufacturers, we've brought up Evertz a couple of times, but manufacturers like Evertz in their terminal gear that go in their card frames, the audio embedders have been having more and more audio processing built in that's controllable either at the front panel, at the front of the card itself, which can be kind of clunky, or through, for instance, with Evertz, their Magnum control system. So you can dial in quite a wide range of delay and do other processing as well. You can do limiting and checking levels and adjusting levels in the embedder itself. So that's a very powerful tool.
Awesome. So moving on, Gerald is asking, Blackmagic at the low end and Ross at the high end, both are refusing to adopt NDI in any meaningful way. New tech is stuck in the middle. How can you future-proof a studio design around a standard that two of the major vendors are not currently backing?
Well, is that true? Expression has, excuse me, Expression makes a box that is NDI compatible. There are no SDI outputs or inputs on it. So I think that's one example of them embracing NDI.
I think NDI is getting the slow embrace, like Panasonic just came out with Kairos. That's leveraging a lot of NDI as well. As NDI, further expands, now Black Magic, that's a tough one. Black Magic's kind of always been that in our industry, right? I mean, they came up with 6G for all intents and purposes before anyone even had a 6G spigot or doing anything with 6G. They had 12G stuff before 12G was a real thing. And a lot of that was not even a real SMPTE standard. They were just kind of doing their own versions of things and making it work. I think Black Magic is always going to kind of be one of those that is its own ecosystem. I mean, you look at it, for example, their camera systems that can offer control. Well, you can't control those cameras unless you're using an A10 switcher. So really, those components where I put Black Magic in, it's oftentimes in those throwdown, conversion, terminal types items that play nicely with anything, no matter what it is. Otherwise, you decide to go the Black Magic route, you are definitely marrying yourself to that Black Magic route. I think NDI will continue to evolve. I think it will continue to permeate our industry in aspects, even to the point of maybe it's not, like, for example, the expression Mario brought up, where it is just native NDI and only native NDI. Often devices will have NDI capabilities while still supporting baseband and IP. So those types of devices are handy to bridge some of those gaps, right? Bridge systems together. It's Wild West, though. I like that question because we're in this great period of transition. We're transitioning to all of our systems being more network-based. We're transitioning to network-based distribution of signals. NDI is one of those many flavors, 2110, 22-6, AES-67. I mean, the flavors, there's a lot of them. I think as time continues on, and again, I kind of hammered on this a little bit earlier, the interoperability part is something that is still out there. It's still being worked on, like obviously NMOS and things of that nature, ISO 4586 have helped bridge some of that, but I don't think we're done. And I think that's something that's going to ever, progress further into our industry, as we have seen a lot of buy-in from on the NDI front outside of NewTek itself.
And I think one of the other important things here is also that the core thing where all of these technologies are beginning to meld isn't in a routing switcher. It's actually in a IP router, Cisco or Arista, those folks. So that's where the mixing of this is going to happen at the end. And that's kind of where everything is going to end up dragging off to. So if you're looking at future proofing, regardless of what the formats are going to be, because there's digital glue you can buy to make that happen. Bird Dog makes a ton of it. We're using part of it here at the studio today. But having a routing switcher that has A, redundancy, which may mean you need two, and B, the bandwidth to handle all of these streams, which are packetized now or being packetized in short order, is a core thing that you need to look at. John, I stepped on you.
Yeah, that's okay. I was going to say I definitely agree with Mason. NDI is evolving and becoming more and more embraced. NDI 5 is coming out now, and I think as more major manufacturers like Panasonic, for instance, embrace and try to use the technology that the standards bodies will try to work with, the developers of NDI. I don't know that they would make a hard and fast standard like ST2110 is, but certainly work in the arena of making things more interoperable.
And I think the other thing also is, as standards end up being adopted, or as a method of connectivity ends up being adopted, the standards bodies end up adapting and saying, yes, we're going to need to turn this into something. 12G has been around for a long time, and it's now in committee at SMPTE, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So it'll soon be an official standard because it's just become ubiquitous. So as NDI becomes ubiquitous, it's the same thing's going to happen. Right. Because the other fun thing is, standards, everybody's got them, and trying to figure out where everything's going to end up shaking out. And that's why I think it's also still important that it's going to still end up shaking out into a IP-based routing infrastructure. So that's the one thing you want to buy with a very long look into your future. All right, interesting. John Schilberg is asking, is there a rule of thumb for calculating cost of ownership related to annual maintenance fees for control room related gear?
There is, in many cases, what your costs turn out to be based on your staffing and the abilities of your staff is the number of support contracts that you're going to invest in. Certainly, manufacturers provide will be very happy to sell you extended warranties on their equipment. But then also here at KeyCode, we offer all of our clients KeyCode total care support contracts of varying levels based on phone support, equipment warranties, on-site visits, etc. It almost becomes more OpEx than CapEx. I'm not going to try to age myself, but when I got into television and started working in television and started actually as a maintenance technician, boards still had discrete components, and that's changed so much. I mean, the evolution of circuit boards over the last number of years has been extraordinary, to the point where it's literally impossible, if not highly improbable, for a maintenance technician to go in and fix it unless it's a software issue. So a lot of that too is calculating the cost of, okay, so I've bought a brand new production switcher. Is it worth my while? Is it worth the investment to buy a spare parts kit? Is it worth the while to buy a spare boards kit? A lot of that is determined by how quick does your turnaround need to be. I mean, if you're a 24-hour news channel and you've got to be on the air, you're definitely going to invest in things like that, because something breaks, you have to fix it, and you have to fix it before it broke, right? Whereas if you're more on the industrial side or the educational side, and you have some time to be able to do warranty repairs or warranty swaps, you can budget for that. So I think that's the way you calculate it, is the criticality of the equipment, how, to what extent you use it in a typical day. And yes, it can get pricey depending on the product, but again, risk versus reward. It costs me $10,000 to get a new board. How much is it going to cost me if I'm off the air for 8 hours? So.
And I think another interesting thing that comes into play there is hardware and the license to make software work are two separate things. So if I buy the hardware, a Grass 200 switcher from, some odd years ago, you put it in, you needed people to maintain it, you may need to buy it components, but at no time does the hardware ever stop working because your software license is expired. It just simply did, and it kept doing forever. Or as long as you maintained it, it was good, or they didn't change the standards out and it suddenly needed to be HD. In today's day and age, there is certain pieces of hardware you buy, and if the license to make that software works for what it does today in perpetuity, that's a pretty good deal. You don't need to necessarily make any further investments into the software unless you need support to fix something that has broken software-wise, or you need the latest software updates to do this next new cool thing. It will, features get added on in software updates that allow hardware platforms to do something different. So if you've got that sort of a perpetual license model, okay, if you're going to lock in your infrastructure to just do these things, and it's just going to do that for a long time, that's your cost. If you know that you're going to need to continually update this and the next version of software is going to need to be there, or you have a licensing model that expires, like your production switcher stops working on the 31st of a month, you need to figure that, yes, there's going to be this cost. And the rule of thumb, I would say at that point, is figure 20%. Your net purchase cost at MSRP. Take that, turn that into a 20% figure. That's your year-over-year licensing if you need to have those software updates, or you've got a model where you need to make sure that the license gets renewed each year. Otherwise, it stops working. So I would just say 20% there, but look for things that are perpetual or don't need that sort of level of changes, because there's plenty of people who are working on hardware that has licenses that are old and they've just been printing money with it because they haven't needed to make any changes. They don't need anything cool, new, and different.
The other thing,
the more you get into the digital domain, the more you're faced with that problem. And
yes.
A lot of times the only way you can make it work is with software patches. So you may be better off keeping some things like audio in the analog domain in certain situations. And I'd be interested to know Austin City Limits, how much of what they do is still analog and how much is AES, CBU, how much is Dante, and how much is Matty.
Yeah. One piece I was going to say too, to kind of round this one out, is definitely your, because we talked about support and the ROI on support. Interview your manufacturers. Get to know the manufacturers that you're about to invest in, because that's something like, if you know another site or a partner that you've worked with, or you need references from somebody like your integrator, like ourselves, we have clients and customers that love to talk to other people about the stuff that they have and their experience with it. Support is one of those big investments, especially in control room type equipment that's mission critical. And oftentimes, that's an expensive piece of gear. That's going to be an expensive piece of gear to maintain support on. Is the ROI there though? Have I interviewed this manufacturer? Do I feel comfortable with the level of support that they're going to be able to give me? Do other people that also have this equipment have a good experience with their support from that manufacturer? And then furthermore, identifying manufacturers, and I love that the question came from John, identify manufacturers that maybe have longer term included manufacturer support, such as Utah Scientific with like their 10-year support program that you don't have to pay for. So oftentimes that is something that you should consider as you're shopping for your systems of, if this is mission critical and I do need this under support, make that a part of your conscious decision-making as you look and vet at this technology, because it might very well price you out on a specific manufacturer if you are planning to carry support for a 5-10-year term, where another manufacturer might be able to give that to you at no cost or a lower cost and actually provide a better quality of care. So definitely something that's I highly advise at looking into.
That also brings up one of the interesting things. There's a difference between the total cost of ownership and your return on investment. And the difficulty with production gear a lot of the times is it sits idle for a good chunk of time because no one's in actually doing a production. If it's a daily show, then yeah, you've got a lot more folks. But if you're looking at a facility that does something weekly or on occasion, the return on the investment actually goes down. Now, if you're getting a lot of value out of what you're building for, then that kind of works out. But that's also been one of the challenges that a lot of people have been trying to do, is centralizing production space, because they know that, okay, Fox is only going to use the facility Monday through Wednesday. Maybe they could lease it out to an NBC or a CBS Thursday through Sunday. That's the thing that's interesting there with facilities these days. Joe is asking, for multi-view, are you using a video routing switcher or is this over IP?
Well, can be both. Multi-views have certainly started to, there's definitely multi-view manufacturers now that are starting to create multi-view that are IP native, so 2110. Baseband native multi-viewers have been around for a very long time. And then we kind of touched base a little bit on embedded multi-view, which is actually happening off the switching router, or even a production router. You can use a multi-view out of that as well. So there's, aspects of that. It really is going to depend on what is your core facilities infrastructure. So what is my core digital video routing switcher? What is my core production routing switchers? Are these IP enabled systems? Does it make sense to invest in an IP multi-view system? But certainly, as we work on newer projects, greenfield type projects that are more leaning IP or even fully IP multi-viewing is real slick. It makes things a lot easier. It's more sources are more highly available, because again, now we're going out to this network instead of, which is the router. It's not just this small network is only these few things. We really can see all of our sources. So there's real power behind IP multi-viewing. But again, you need to make sure that your facility is actually capable of bringing that in and taking advantage of the power that will give you.
Yeah, and the manufacturer, a number of manufacturers have embraced IP multi-viewing and are putting out fantastic products. I've come across instances where you'd be in a TV station and the news director says, you know what, I would like to see the control room's multi-viewer on my computer or in the monitors in my office. And that's where you leverage the power of IP, because then you build that into your own, internal networks. But again, you have to be very careful when you're doing the network design to make sure that the network you have has the bandwidth to sustain, that kind of high quality video throughput. But I agree with Mason, more and more the concept of IP multi-viewers has taken hold and been much more readily adopted, because again, too, if you're on the right network and your news director is at home sick with a fever, if they can hook in via a VPN to the station system, they can see their multi-viewers on the computers at home and monitor what's going on. So it's a very powerful technology.
Awesome sauce. We'll go with one last question from Alec Turner. Outside of the software solutions like OBS and vMix and the Blackmagic ATEM lines, what options do we as Keycode know about any of the new crop of small broadcasters, or I think it's items for switchers for small broadcasters, that are giving production options to small venues, churches, and events?
Well, we've had a lot of applications within churches, particularly here in Denver, where they're embracing either Telestream Wirecast gear or the NewTek TriCaster systems. NewTek, especially as they're evolving their TriCaster line, is adding more and more features so that again, as I mentioned, a couple of daytime talk shows that we were supporting were being done on NewTek TriCasters. So they're adding more and more features that give you higher production values and are quite easy to use, whether you control it from a keyboard and mouse, or you go to a more traditional 2-stripe or 4-stripe panel.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of those little tools, that's software based. Okay, install this application, put some sort of I/O card on, and bam, here I go. I'm mixing a show. Of the ones you named, Wirecast would definitely be one I would add to that. I think that the crop up of so many of these is all courtesy of our distributed nature of now we're not all in the office. We're not all sitting at the desk. We're not all in the production, environment. especially as corporate, has tried to struggle to solve these problems of like, well, we love our meetings. We've done these meetings we have this weekly meeting. We do it every week, and we've never always done it. We can't get rid of it, but we want to have everyone in the team see it. It's really proliferated all of these small software startups that are creating tools such as OBS, such as Wirecast. I've seen countless just deployed amongst corporate partners, especially doing AV type of projects. I don't think those are going away. I think there's even more to come, to be honest. I think that's one of those pieces where we're going to start seeing integration of multiple tools, which already happens, of being able to lay in graphics, being able to handle records, being able to do playback of some pre-produced content. And even seeing, like, for example, big players come down and create more inclusive tools that are software-based, that are a little more friendly, or even cloud-driven. Simply Live comes to mind, which I know was, I believe, formerly a few EBS engineers that had kind of dropped off and done a little something with their systems, which handles replay and graphics and production switching and streaming and capture and ingest, all sorts of things. So I think it's, we've seen our manufacturers kind of get into that product line, but we've also seen from the opposite end, from the AV side of the world, a lot of developers building tools that are starting to play in our game. I think that's going to happen more and more. I like to see those tools. A lot of them are pretty clunky, so I absolutely recommend getting your hands on it, playing with it, vetting it, making sure it works for your uses. And that's also why you see KeyCode keeps their line card quite small. We're all about best of breed technology, and since a lot of this stuff is new and still growing legs and getting its feet underneath, it's not necessarily product lines you'll see KeyCode pick up right away, but definitely product lines that, as they progress and grow, could very well end up playing more in our sandbox in the corporate education, broadcasts, all of that side of the world.
Very cool. And that's the other thing. We also have folks that come in and they show us a solution for one area of the industry, and we're like, no, wait, let's take this and put this over here, because we can do a lot of cool stuff with what you're talking about there. And that's how, that's why we're excited about technology. And we, at KeyCode, we try to keep you ahead of technology, but we haven't kept ahead of the clock. So we're out of time, guys. Thanks for sitting down with us, with everybody today, and hammering this out. I'm glad we were able to get the behind the glass section taken care of for all of this. Again, if you've got any questions about getting a control room or a production facility up to speed, please give us a ring here at KeyCode, or hit us on the web. We're pretty easy to find. Thanks for joining us today, and see you all next time.